Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to our virtual council meeting on November 8th, 2023. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order at 1:08. And I do not have a copy of the land acknowledgement. Melanie, do you have one handy there? Or Candace, one of you two can read it if you can pull it up. I don't have it here right now.
Pat, I did email that to you. Are you able to pull that up?
Yep, just a second.
I can share my screen if that would help too. I don't know what your preference is.
I think you better share the screen or hold it. Here it is, Melanie.
Okay.
Okay, we respectfully acknowledge that the township of Asphodel-Norwood is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alterville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. The Township of Asphodel-Norwood respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaty Nations are the First Nations, are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain the responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. I'll now invite everyone to pause for a moment of silent reflection to prepare for the council meeting ahead as a gesture of respect and contemplation. I will now ask council members to declare any pecuniary interest in any matters and to state the interest now or at the time the matter arises. Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. I'm looking for a motion to approve today's agenda as amended with the circulated addendum. Moved by Councillor Ward, second by Deputy Mayor Burt. Questions? All in favor? That motion's carried. Approval of the minutes of the council meeting on October 31st, 2023. Looking for a motion to adopt the council meeting minutes on October 31st. Councillor Walsh. And Councillor Hodge-Greaves. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion's carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes of October 31st? Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thanks, through you, Chair. Candace, I just had a question. You'll probably be including it in your CAO report, but during the last meeting in general business, Councillor Walsh inquired about the Electra energy meeting that you and the CBO were going to have, and I just didn't know if you were going to report on that during your part of the meeting. So
I can report now. Yes, so the chief building official, the planning building assistant, and I met with representatives from Electra last Thursday. We highlighted the township's concerns in regards to the process, or I guess the lack thereof. They identified that the process is not ideal, but they're under tight timelines. We identified the concerns with the property. but also highlighted other properties that would be more suitable for a development such as this, and they are currently researching and looking into those. They were unaware that this site could be it's not in our settlement area, but essentially due to all the upgrades for phase 4, it'll be a highly serviced piece of land with municipal water, municipal sanitary. Therefore, it could be slated for additional residential growth. So it's not an appropriate location. They were unaware of that data. So they also require municipal resolution. They are aware that they will require municipal rezoning, and township staff made them aware that the likelihood of that, although we are not members of council and can't speak on behalf of council, that they would have some hurdles to jump through in order to accomplish both of those things for that particular piece of land. There was question as to whether they should move even forward in light of all of that information with the public meeting at all, just because of the lack of appetite from the municipality to support those things. We've yet to hear either way from them. But they were kind of leaning towards looking for is the municipality, do you support it conceptually? Would you support this type of development in the municipality? I said, well, that's a different motion than asking for a motion of support on a particular piece of land. And I stated that would require a delegation. I didn't feel that message should be delivered by staff. That should be delivered by themselves. So I suspect if they're going to go down that road looking for a motion of support in principle. So I think what they're trying to avoid is if the municipality is going to shut down this type of activity within the municipal boundaries as a whole, there's no point in them spending more time and resources and looking at other pockets of land if they wouldn't be able to achieve support anywhere. We haven't received a delegation request from them at this point in time for that, but the meeting went exceptionally well, and they were receptive to all of the concerns. And I think based on what we highlighted, I don't think they will be pushing to move forward with that pocket of land.
Okay, thank you so much. You'd mentioned about they have these tight timelines. Like, do they have a certain amount of time that they have to get these facilities kind of up and running or proposed to the government? I was just kind of wondering about that timeline that you'd mentioned they were on.
I think they're under a model under the IESO, and there's different intakes to the program. Okay. So they have intake timelines, and I know that they can have an increase in the points that are awarded to them if they get a municipal resolution of support prior to December 31st of this year. Okay. So I think, they had provincial support through the IESO to have these types of battery storage, to support the growth in the province and to change how electricity is delivered. But again, I guess probably similar to any other funding stream, here it is, and now you've got to accomplish boxes A through K in 3 months or 4 months. I didn't get a clear indication from them how or why this particular pocket of land was chosen. That was one of my first questions. I still don't have a clear understanding on how that was, other than there is a list of criteria as to they have to be within a certain proximity of, the main hydro corridor that goes through that property. That's what made this appetizing, because they wouldn't have to get an easement over a bunch of properties to put infrastructure to get to that big bank of hydro that they need to tap into. So traditionally, if they get a site that's more conducive, but it's a concession away from this large hydro line, then they have to get easements across private property to run the underground or the feed lines to feed that battery storage. So this is close to County Road 40. This was close to that bank of that hydro lines that run through there, and they don't have to get an easement. And it's approximately 35 to 39 acres is what they required for this particular project. So that was good information to know, because some of the sites we even brought forward to propose to them weren't useful because we didn't know about that piece about having
Right.
to be so close to the large hydro corridor. So then, of course, we own municipal property that has the large corridor through, but then, you know, it has to meet certain setbacks from surface body water. So we've got the ooze right through there. We've got the mill pond right there, etc. So, you know, but it was a great conversation. I think that, you know, if they move forward with the public meeting, I think it's going to be, yeah, I told them to be hydrated because it's going to be an interesting meeting because there's a lot of people that are upset, but they got too many hoops to jump through to make it viable to them to spend a lot of time and resources on it, which is basically the message to take away. But if they want to come forward as a delegation to you guys at a future meeting to see if you support this type of development as a whole, and allow you guys to answer questions and allow staff the opportunity to propose potential sites that make sense, that maybe a zoning is appropriate or that the land uses surrounding it is appropriate. So you're not plopping this right beside a residential development. You know, whether it's aesthetic concerns or noise was another concern. Like how is there a hum to this thing? Like, is there a noise component? And they said they have to do things to mitigate that. But to me, it's no different than the solar panel farms have to plant trees around it. So they put a check mark in a box and they plant trees this big, and maybe 20 years down the road, it'll block the solar panels, but not immediately. And so there is concerns in regards to any sort of immediate remediation to protect that residential area from this type of development. But they were receptive. We pushed back pretty hard, as you can imagine, and they were very receptive, and they obviously don't want to go where they're unwanted. But the province is wanting this type of development to move forward, and there isn't a lot of opportunity of these large power lines moving through it. So
Okay, thank you for that. I'm glad it was a good meeting. So it'll be interesting to see if they do carry out this public meeting or not, or if they're gonna wait and do the next step as suggested. So thank you.
you're welcome.
Councillor Walsh? Mary, you're muted.
Should have this figured out by now. Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Candace, just the other quick question is, are they looking like for one site or multiple sites to set up and develop? Did you get a sense of that?
Yes, they are looking at multiple sites. They didn't give an exact number. Only one in Asphodel-Norwood. I don't know how many they're looking at, you know, this part of the province wide. They didn't state that, but they did state that they had other properties that they were going through this process on, but they didn't state where.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? No? Okay, on to the consent agenda. I'm looking for a motion to approve the correspondence items C1 and C2, staff reports R1 through R7, and the police board meeting minutes of July 27th is circulated or amended. Moved by Deputy Mayor Burt. Second by Councillor Walsh.
Comment,
Discussion.
please.
Go ahead.
So you sort of like to pull with a couple questions on R6 and R7, please.
Okay, we'll pull R6 and R7. All in favor with the rest? Councillor Ward?
I just wanted to comment on R7 as well when it comes up for discussion. Thank you.
Okay. We'll bring them up now. R6.
Through you, Mayor. More so comments than anything else. Boys and Girls Club of Porthos sounds like it was a great marriage again this year. And I believe, Dennis, they've indicated that they are looking to come back again in 2024 at this point.
Yes, that
Okay,
is
so
correct.
that's good. Okay, that's good news. The other question on that report was, again, we won't know this, but I'm sure Seamus is aware of it, is that twin pad in Peterborough comes online, I believe, the end of next year. That potentially will have some impact on rental revenue for us, because I know Peterborough does rent a fair bit of ice out here. So I'm sure he will take that into consideration for his budget next year. And the other one on this one, if I can, one more comment through your mayor, is just thanks for the update on the outdoor rink. I know that was asked to be brought back after the meeting on October 24th as to what was involved with our staff in the outdoor rink. And, it does look like there was some activities done, certainly, but I think there was lots of learnings from this last year. And I will be bringing forward in general business a follow-up to their request for funding, but I'll bring that forward in general business. But certainly in reading through this, there was some work involved, but I think some good learnings from last year that hopefully will be minimal use by our staff in this coming winter season.
Okay.
And that's it for R6 for me.
Anyone else? All in favor of the motion? The motion was made, was it not?
Yeah, but before you call the vote, you need to let, I think there's questions on R7.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I wrote that down, Barry, and I didn't even ask you about it. Go ahead, Barry.
No worries. Just on R7, just a couple little notes. One is fire. I realize looks like they're pacing ahead of budget. Again, a tough department, I'm sure, to try and budget, because we never know how many calls we're going to have. But just one, obviously, we need to keep an eye on. And the other one, the other question I had, actually, I got clarified through Candace earlier this morning, so I'm good on that one.
Councillor War?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. To Candace, if I may, I just wanted to once again say that the note column is invaluable for us to look at things that we need to be looking at. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, are there any unexpected or note development in this budget or this report that we should be aware of as council members going forward?
Unknown in the third quarter in 2023. No. Couple of things to highlight, just to circle back to Councillor Walship on the fire department. Yes, it's running a little bit ahead, but one thing is all the capital invoices for fire feed earlier than all of the other departments. So you'll see transportation's running light, but essentially in theory, they're not running light because all of the invoices aren't in at September 30th for the construction season. The construction isn't finished at September 30th, let alone having all the invoices in and having them processed to hit the GL. Where fire, it tends to be more equipment based, so they tend to order a lot of their budgetary items in the first quarter or second quarter of the year. So by the time the third quarter hits, all their capital is done, their reserve transfers are done. So their capital in comparison to other departments is sitting at 100%, which miscues the overall 85. So, I mean, and we're slightly over with the calls, because as you can see from the third quarter fire department report, we are ahead of the last 3-year trend in regards to number of calls. So it takes more manpower to address those. But all in all, I think it will be slightly over as a whole, but not nothing that is a red flag overage. When you look at that kind of 10% one way or another, it'll be within that cushion easily enough. But if anything, as far as things to more flag for council's attention as you move forward, that will be more, I think, those things in the budget process for 2024. There's nothing in the 2023 year that council isn't aware of that's transpired or that's happening in the fourth quarter. It's more, I think, the 2024 budget where things will have to get highlighted for you to be aware of more moving forward instead of looking back.
Thanks, Candace.
You're welcome.
Other questions? All in favor? Motion is carried. We have a delegation with us today, Peter Simkisco, with Watson and Associates. Are you on there, Peter?
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, I'm here.
Please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. And I'm going to be sharing my screen. So let me just get that set up quickly here and we can proceed. Okay, and I believe we should be live on the screen now.
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Thank you for confirming that. Watson and Associates have been retained by the township in this capacity to assess capital funding alternatives for several projects that are being planned to expand the service capacity within the township's water and wastewater systems. And the purpose of expanding service capacity is to allow for further developments to take place in the future. And so in this presentation this afternoon, we are going to take a look at the specifics of each of the 4 projects that have been included in this assessment, both in terms of the additional capacity that those projects will generate, as well as the associated costs. We will then also look at how the costs of this service expansion could be recovered through capital charges or connection fees imposed on development. And then finally, I will provide some commentary on the capital funding alternatives that were considered part of this exercise. So to dive right into the specifics of each project, we will first look at the 2 projects needed within the water system. The township completed an EA process last year, which recommended the replacement of the existing standpipe with a larger one. The larger standpipe was recommended in order to address an existing water storage deficiency and to also provide additional capacity for future development. Looking at the servicing capacity calculations for this project, the effective volume of the existing standpipe is approximately 885 cubic meters. And based on the service population of approximately 2,500 people, the storage requirement would be approximately 1,330 cubic meters. The new standpipe will have an effective volume of 3,200 cubic meters, and that volume would be sufficient to service a population of approximately 1,270 people, which represents an increase of about 3,768 from today. It is also important to note here that approximately 42% of the new standpipe would be replacing the capacity that currently exists with the current standpipe and addressing the current storage deficiency that has also been identified. And therefore that 42% share of the new standpipe cost would not be recovered through a charge on new development. So the other need that has been identified for the water system is to expand the water production capacity, and that would be done by drilling 2 additional wells. The 2 additional wells would increase the rated capacity of the drinking water system from 1,965 cubic meters per day to 3,275 cubic meters per day. And that would sufficient capacity to accommodate an additional population of approximately 3,750 people. So the table on the next slide here lists all of the capital cost estimates that are currently available for the new standpipe. So that's items 1 through 3, as well as the 2 additional wells, which are items 4 through 6 in the table here. A couple of points to note with respect to the new standpipe. You can in the middle of the table under benefit to existing that we have deducted the share of costs that would be replacing the existing capacity, as well as addressing the current storage deficiency. So as noted previously, that's approximately 42% of the total cost. We have also deducted in the next column a proportionate share of the anticipated grant funding for this project. And so that leaves us with the net costs that could be recovered through a capital charge, as shown in the third column from the right. And these costs amount to approximately $1.6 million. And those capital costs are then divided by the equivalent population capacity resulting from each project to arrive at a capital charge per capita. And in total, for all of the water projects that have been identified, the capital charge equates to just under $420 per capita. So now switching over to wastewater, the township has identified the need to undertake work at the wastewater treatment plant, allow it to operate at the original rated capacity of about 1,500 cubic meters per day. With the proposed modifications, the wastewater treatment plant would be able to service a population of approximately 4,950 people, which represents an increase of approximately 2,450 people from the population that's being serviced today. I should also point out here that the township has identified further phases of the expansion as well. However, for the time being, only the phase 1 modifications have been included in the calculation of the charge. The second project on the wastewater side involves replacing the existing Lions Park sewage pumping station with a larger one to allow for increased capacity to handle flows from future development. And the pumping station upgrade would also be accompanied by by twinning of the existing force main. So several phases of expansion have been identified within the background engineering work that has been completed to date with respect to this expansion. And ultimately, the solution that is proposed would result in a larger pumping station that could be equipped to provide sufficient peak flow capacity for a population of approximately 10,360 people. However, the pumping station would initially at least be outfitted with equipment that could handle peak flows from a population of approximately 5,240 people, which is an increase of approximately 2,816 from the population that's being serviced today. So similar to what we had looked at for water, the table on the next slide here lists all of the capital cost estimates that are currently available for the wastewater treatment plant expansion. That's items 1 through 3 in a table here. The pumping station upgrades, that's items 4 through 6, as well as the associated force main twinning, which is item number 7 in the table. We have again made some deductions where there is existing capacity that's being replaced, specifically in the case of the new pumping station, to arrive at the net costs that could be recovered through a capital charge. And those capital costs amount to just over $18.5 million. And then we're dividing that net capital cost by the equivalent population capacity resulting from each individual project or some cases project components. And we arrive at a capital charge per capita. And in total for all of the wastewater projects that have been identified, the capital charge equates to about $5,540 per capita. So having walked through the specifics of each capital project that would need to be undertaken to expand service capacity and the associated costs, we can now look at how that translates into a connection fee or a capital charge by type of development. So as we saw earlier, the capital charge is initially calculated on a per capita basis, and we see those per capita charges or amounts at the top of the table for both water and wastewater. And again, these are the same amounts that we saw earlier when we looked at the capital cost listings a short while ago. And those per capita charges are then translated into charges for different types of residential units based on the average occupancy levels in terms of persons per unit which were determined through the recently completed development charges background study. And so, for example, because single and semi-detached homes have an average occupancy of approximately 2.7 people, the per capita charge is multiplied by that factor of 2.7 to produce a charge per dwelling unit. And that would be $1,132 for water and just over $14,900 for wastewater, or a combined charge of $16,072 per single detached home. And then in terms of a non-residential charge, that can be imposed various ways, but commonly would be a charge per unit of gross floor area. And that is calculated by taking the per capita amount and dividing it by the average floor space per worker, which in this case is approximately 1,180 square feet per worker. And so that gives us a combined charge for water and wastewater of $5.05 per square foot of gross floor area. On the next slide here, we are showing the connection fees that are currently in effect in the township. That's the second column of the table, or with the green or header. And we are comparing those to the calculated charges by development type, which are the purple columns in the table. Now, comparison is a little bit tricky here because currently the fees are imposed per connection, not per dwelling unit or gross floor area. That being said, a single detached home would typically be serviced by a single connection, and therefore the charges are comparable for that type of development. And what we see is that for water, the charge would actually decrease by about $120, which is about a 10% reduction. However, when we look at the wastewater component, obviously the impact is much more significant, with the calculated charge being significantly higher than the current charge, where it would be going from $1,300 per connection to just under $15,000 for a single detached home. And while that is certainly a big increase, that is the reality of what it is going to cost to expand service capacity in order to allow future development to proceed. What we have provided on the next slide here is a comparison of the development fees payable on a single detached home in the township and also in other area municipalities. The development fees include development charges as well as connection fees, and for completeness also include upper tier development charges as well as education development charges where those apply. And so based on the charges that are currently in effect for a single detached home, that type of development would be paying just under $23,100 in terms of connection charges and development charges. That's illustrated with the gray arrow on the right-hand side of the chart. And then in terms of the calculated charges, those would be put that total development fee payable, again, totaling development charges as well as the connection fees at just under $36,900 per unit. So that's illustrated with the teal arrow to the left in the chart. So that's a difference of, or an increase specifically of about $13,800 from the charges that are currently in effect. That represents about a 60% increase from where it is today. And that does include about a $230 increase in the development charge component as well, which is expected for January 1st of next year based on the development charges background study and the first year of phase-in of those development charges. So as part of the review, we also considered whether it makes more sense to impose these charges under the authority of the Development Charges Act or maintain the township's current practice of imposing them under the authority of the Municipal Act. And what we ultimately determined is that the Municipal Act authority would be preferable, and that's for several reasons. Firstly, as already noted, the township has historically imposed water and wastewater connection fees under the authority of the Municipal Act. And so this is the well-established practice in the township. Whereas development charges only apply to new development, connection charges imposed under the Municipal Act would equally apply to redevelopment of existing properties that are currently unserviced and connecting to the systems. Next, the requirements of the Development Charges Act with respect to providing an estimate of the anticipated development and then relating the increase in need for service to that anticipated development do not apply under the Municipal Act. And at this point, it may be difficult to predict the amount and the timing of development with precision. And therefore, it seems more appropriate to calculate these charges based on the amount of servicing capacity that each individual project will create, as has been presented in this presentation. Furthermore, there have been recent legislative changes to the Development Charges Act through the More Homes Built Faster Bill 23, which introduced further statutory exemptions, payment of development charges, as well as reductions for certain types of units, as well as introduced this mandatory 5-year phase-in for new development charges. And with those changes, this ultimately limits the amount of cost recovery from new developments through charges that are imposed under the authority of the Development Charges Act. And then finally, the timeline to implementation would be shorter under the Municipal Act. And so in terms of next steps, to wrap up the presentation, we are asking for Council to receive the presentation and the technical memo that has been prepared that spells out the calculations in a little bit more detail. And then at a later date, what would be brought in front of Council is a bylaw to actually implement these charges. And again, that would be done at a later date, not in the meeting today. And that concludes the formal part of the presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Peter. That was very informative. Any questions, councillors? Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, Peter. Yeah, this is a very daunting document, and I know it's been worked on for a while. I just have a couple of clarifications. So the timeline you had mentioned, it can be a faster collection, I guess. At what time through the Municipal Act Authority would those charges be due? Is that at the permit phase? Is that at the connection phase? I'm just unsure of when that would happen. That's question one.
So Council has discretion over that. We have started to put together a draft bylaw to get that ready to bring in front of Council. And what we have envisioned at this point is to align it with the general practice that's followed with development charges, where the charges be calculated and become payable at the time of building permit issuance. With that said, typically Council would also have the ability to enter into accelerated or deferred payment agreements on a case-by-case basis as well.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one, again, just clarification. You had mentioned on new development as well as redevelopment. And obviously this is just within the settlement area where houses are being built with sewer and water capacity, correct? Just to confirm that.
So that's where the charges would apply. Yes, what I was trying to indicate is that a development charge only gets triggered if there is a building permit, typically, right? But what a connection charge under the Municipal Act allows you to do is if there are existing properties that are currently unserviced, but that might have servicing available by virtue of some of these capacity extensions, you could impose the same charge on them when they do connect to the systems.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And that's my two questions for now. I'm sure there's more out there, so I'll carry on.
Councillor War.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. When somebody reads it out like that, it does generate more questions, that's for sure. On page 11 of your presentation, under the grant subsidy, column did come down as 0 all the way down. And so do you know of any upcoming grants that might be available to municipalities that we might be able to, or that would probably be a question to our CAO. And the second question was back to the existing houses. Do we know how many homes within the settlement area are not connected that may face these connection fees? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
So Peter, I can take those. Yes, because there was no contribution agreement entered into at the time that this study was prepared with a guarantee of funding, there was no different than the water tower where you've seen there was a contribution agreement entered into for ISIP Green. I highly anticipate, again, crystal ball, but highly anticipate that there will be two funding stream mechanisms available for wastewater over the course of the next year or two, just based on information coming forward from the provincial government. One is the funding stream that was launched at AMO in regards to, getting homes in the ground faster, and those municipalities that can hit their housing targets, you'll have the ability to tap into infrastructure. And then when they release the next round of ISIP Green, so those two funding stream opportunities will be available to the municipality to assist with offsetting the costs. If the municipality, so two things, these charges can be altered in a couple of ways. One is exactly what you've highlighted, is if a grant or a funding stream is provided, then we have to claw back the growth percentage of the update of that asset from the charge. Or two, when this work is tendered. So as of right now, municipal staff have gained the costing that has been included in the connection charge from professional consultants, and we even had their opinion peer reviewed to try to get some comfortability with the costs that we were embedding into the charge. When that project is tendered and the actual costs are known, then potentially a further conversation is needed to ensure that the connection charge is relevant. So those two key pieces are, I guess, the unknowns, but ultimately present day with information that is known today, this is the connection charge that would be justifiable based on what is required to take on growth as there's no capacity. If the municipality chooses to phase in a bylaw, then you have that opportunity as well. Similar to the DC that was adopted back in 2018, your justified charge was X, and then the municipality decided to adopt a charge of Y and take 5 years to get up to the justified charge. So essentially, this municipality had a phase-in approach prior to the province making it mandatory. So there is that philosophy available as well. So at least it gets the process started, but essentially you're not too far down the gate if you take a phase-in approach when those other two pieces of information are known, such as successful grants and the tendering process being completed.
Thank you for that. And just to the second part of that question, do we know how many existing properties may be impacted?
Yes, so there's not many for the northern developments like the phase 4 when it comes online. I actually don't even think that the properties between Marianne Court and Keeler will actually be serviced with sanitary with the upgrades. Again, that's an engineering discussion with design coming down the pipe. So then you're just looking at Mill Street. So really very negligible because there's water out there. So we're talking a handful of houses that would be susceptible to the mandatory connection bylaw that's already in place that was adopted in 2015.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Actually, just building upon Councillor War's questions. So we can move forward with a phased-in approach similar to what we do or are planning to do with DC charges. So you could start at 80 and then phase the other 5% a year increase for the next 4 years to get to the 100. We can do the same thing with water, wastewater connection charges, correct? Okay. And the second question, also just to follow up to Councillor War, as you mentioned, that this model was based on, no funding available right now. So if a funding stream came along, we also know the exact cost at that time. Nothing would be retroactive. It would simply be, we could potentially look at changing the connection fees moving forward based on current knowledge of this is how much funding we have, and these are the actual true costs of what it's going to take to build these infrastructures. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, Peter, unless you have something you need to add there, but that's my understanding. It wouldn't be retroactive. The bylaws
That's correct.
when it's adopted. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thank you. No, that is actually good to know, because that was one of my unknowns, and I'm glad that got cleared up, because I wasn't sure about that if the funding came in, because on your charts you're showing, you know, the grant subsidies and other contributions, and those are coming off. So that would remain in effect like from one year to the next, depending on the grants that came in. So I thank you very much for that information.
Any other questions of Peter? Well, again, thank you, Peter.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Peter.
So we have a recommended motion, and that the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood receives a water and wastewater connection charges presentation for information. And further, that the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood approves the Village of Norwood water and wastewater connection fees as presented. And further, that the Township of Asphodel-Norwood directs staff to prepare a correlating bylaw with the phase-in approach for its consideration at the next regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor War. Was that Deputy Mayor Burt? Did you have your hand up there? Deputy Mayor Burt. Candace, you had a question?
I don't have a question, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the letters that were received from the development community prior to adopting the motion.
Right. There's two of them.
So I don't know if Councillor Hodge-Greaves wants to say something, or let me continue or to talk.
Councillor Hodge-Greaves.
Sorry, I was trying to get my words together, because when Peter, in his presentation, when Peter was speaking about the bylaw, he was saying at a future meeting, and this motion is for the next regular meeting of council, which is next week. And then we do have the two letters from the developers. So personally, I would like more time to digest this information, certainly not for the next regular council meeting, which is next week. But that's what I was trying to get that out before the motion went on. So I do know the motion is as it stands. Sorry, Ken.
No, that's okay. So I guess in spirit of that, that's why I was asking to speak before the motion was called, just to ensure that conversation was had, and to give council a further update. So I have spoken to HBNG, the Holborn Group, and representatives from them in regards to it. So I thought council may wish to learn the contents of that conversation. They were well aware when they purchased the property that they are going to develop on, that there was no capacity in the sanitary beyond just shy of 100 units that have already been assigned to Norwood Park Phase 4, because they have received draft plan approval. So they were aware that there was going to be upgrades required to the Sani upgrades. They are just looking for time to put that information into they call it a pro forma. And when you hear that terminology, basically what that means is they take costs and sales and market data, and they basically have a program or a spreadsheet, and they enter in all of the costs, and then it spits out a viability or feasibility type score to be able to determine if the development can move forward. If council was to move forward with a phased-in approach with an 80% to mirror the DC, and you are to remove the $1,300 that they currently pay, the sanitary increase is $8,261. Then you are removing the water $100 increase. So, essentially it's only going up $8,100. But then when the DC bylaw gets approved, you're adding in $230 on top of that approximate $8,100. So all in all, you're about an $8,300 increase for all three, DC, Sani, water. Although the split is not equal amongst those three fee categories, essentially $8,300 per lot is the increase. You'll see in Peter's presentation where Asphodel-Norwood falls in relation to neighbors, that is at the 100% charge. So if council is asking, I think the biggest takeaway from today isn't the timing. The biggest takeaway from today is for council to approve the phased in approach. So that the bylaw is to come back with a phased in mechanism in place. That council agenda went out with the recommended motion prior to receiving the letters, because technically those letters should have been received as of they weren't included in the agenda. So the motion that was prepared was without those developers' letters. But now they've come into play. But they want to know if it's going to be a phased in approach, because that's the number. A phased in is what they would put into their pro forma. But if you're directing staff or the consultant to prepare one at the 100%, then that's what they'll put in and take the time to do. So I think it's more the approach as to what the bylaw approach is to be, that is to be presented at a future meeting, versus the timing of that. And sorry for interrupting. I just thought that was important information for council to be aware of.
Oh, very important. Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yeah, and I understand it's quite a change from what we've seen. I think what we really need to, and not so much understand, because I think we all understand it, is, and the developers certainly do, is that, it's been drilled to us from day one, new development has to pay for development. We can't expect the current ratepayers to pay. So at some point in time, we need those services. We can't have those services without them being paid for. If they're not paid for, we don't get those services and we don't get development. So it's just this, never ending cycle. So I think, how we do it is very important. I like the phased in approach, and, it may stifle some development. It's hard to say. But when you look at the communities, in our region that do have these fees, they're still moving along. And, so it is a bit tough, but you can't have one without the other. So that's just my comment.
Any other comments? Councillor Walsh?
Yeah, basically through you, Mayor, I would just echo what Deputy Mayor Burt said. Is I am supportive to a phased in approach. Yes, this is certainly a jump in fees. So if there's a way that we can work with our developer community to kind of soften that blow in year one. So I love the idea of the phased in approach. I am agreeable to that. One thing for me, I'm a visual person. And Candace, I did send this to you in emails. I'd love to see a chart of what it, with DC, water, and wastewater connecting fees are, what they are now, what they would be in year one with a phase in, what they'd be in year 2, year 3, year 4, just to visually kind of see what it would look like. We certainly know, I think there's some upside to this from the standpoint is, get us to your point, that we have some funding streams that potentially will come along that is going to help with that calculated charge down the road. It's not going to help with us right now, but down the road will help us, that we can potentially readdress this with, potentially some lower rates in year 2, year 3, when that funding potentially would come along and we move forward. But the reality is everything is costing more, and we're at the point where development wants to come to town. We love them to come to town, but they need to help us. They're going to need to help us be able to build the infrastructure to support that development.
Yeah. And I mean, the chart, as I stated, I just didn't have time to get it to you before today's meeting, but we can definitely easily enough prepare it. It would be an assumption-based table though. The assumptions would be that the DC bylaw would be adopted as proposed at the December 12th meeting of council. And two, with the assumption that it's worst case scenario with no grants or funding streams received. We can probably run a hypothetical charge, and Peter and I can chat about this, that if you were to receive, you know, probably say mirror what we received for the water tower in funding. So, or say you received $2.5 million to $3 million in funding towards this project, what that would do to the charge.
That would be nice to see. Yeah.
You know, I highly suspect you know, the municipality, if it continues on the path and the relationships that have been built and sustain on that communication path, that you'll be able to receive one of the two funding streams. So, you know, so I think that's, you know, here's worst case scenario, assuming the DC bylaw is adopted. Here is, you know, with the DC bylaw adoption, and a phased-in approach with the potential of receiving X number of dollars in funding, this is what it would look like. And I do think there's a lens of reasonability towards putting something like that, at least for your information. I don't think it should be presented to the public as a document that's out there that could be, you know, used for decision-based purposes, but for council to have for your own knowledge to be able to make kind of informed decisions moving forward, but it couldn't go up on the website or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, sorry, actually, I have one more question if I can, Mayor. So we're planning to adopt the DC charge bylaw before year end. And when will we adopt this wastewater connection charge?
That is a good question. And I think council's in charge of your own destiny at that point in time. You know, obviously it was the intention of the senior management team to have this adopted at the November 14th meeting of council. Again, that was, with today, traditionally, that's what happens. We have the presentation, we take in questions, we adopt the bylaw at the subsequent meeting. That is traditional process. There's nothing out of the way with that. But again, when that process was established, we didn't have the letters that have been received from the developers in order to ensure that they have time to process it on their end. They understand that they can't change it, but I think they want time. They can't make it cheaper. You can't make the cost of upgrading the sanitary cheaper, but the time to process it. You know, so the DC bylaw, obviously come January 1, if you don't adopt it at December 12th, we have no development charge bylaw. So if the building department was to issue permits, they couldn't actually charge a DC. So that is, I would say, crucial from the municipality's financial health standpoint, that DC bylaw be adopted on December 12th. When it comes to the connection fees, there is an existing fees and charges established in our fees and charges bylaw that would carry on. There's no expiration date like the DC bylaw, so it would continue on. So until a new bylaw is adopted, that when a building permit is issued from the building department, the existing approximate $2,500 in charges would be applicable to the settlement area, to the service properties. So it's really whether you want, how much time you want to give the developers to process the information, because there's not going to be anything changing on the municipal side of things or the information has been presented to you guys. There's no more information to provide other than maybe the charts that Councillor Walsh has asked for a visual, but there's no more information from our chairs or the consultant's chair to present to you for decision-making purposes.
What do you feel is a fair time to let, as you said, nothing necessarily is going to change, but out of fairness to our developers, what would be considered a fair, reasonable time to let them review this?
Your next scheduled council meeting is the 12th of December. They're well aware that the DC bylaw is going to be approved at that meeting. not carrying it over the Christmas season and dealing with it in January. I think if you were to propose that you're going to deal with it at the December 12th meeting of council, you can see the whole package. Here's your DC, here's your connection charges, here's your approach to both. I think here's the story as a whole. That would be deemed more than reasonable for my chair and could be easily explained to them. And they don't need weeks upon weeks or months to process this. They don't have it at their end either, because those developments are moving forward. They're spending money in engineering every day to move forward to get those developments moving. Plus, you have other developments in the queue that you don't want to see a bunch of building permits come in. So, you know what I'm, like where a whole bunch of building permits come in for another development, and then you're not able to pull the appropriate charge.
That's good. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Burt.
Yeah, just one more comment. I'm certainly fine with the way the motion stands, but I didn't make the motion. I seconded it, so I'll leave that up to the first motion taker. But if not, I would not want it any later than December 12th, and to do it at that meeting at that time. So I'll leave it up to Councillor War to decide.
Go ahead, Councillor War.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I'm actually happy to let this stand as well. I feel that we need to move forward because we don't want, well, if things come through the building department, we need to move this forward. I would like to have the motion stand as is. It is a phased-in approach, correct, Candace? Just to read that, it is a phased-in approach that we're looking at.
The bylaw
Yes,
would be presented to council in a phased-in approach. Yeah. Exactly what
I'm happy to let the motion stand. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions?
Oh,
like
sorry, I
appreciate vote on this. Go ahead, Councillor Hodge.
I appreciate the discussion, and I will be supporting the motion. So I do appreciate the extra time and the thought that goes into it. And as Deputy Mayor says, it's reinstates that, growth does need to pay for growth, and it's a big jump, but it's also, otherwise there is you can't do anything and everything. So I do appreciate the time, Candace, and everyone, for the little bit of extra discussion. Thank you.
Okay. So I asked for a recorded vote on this, so continue on with the recorded vote then, please, Candace, or...
Sorry, I didn't hear you say that.
You didn't hear that?
Sorry, just give me 1 sec. So we had the motion moved by Councillor War, seconded by Deputy Mayor Burt, and recorded vote requested by the mayor. Is that all correct? Yes. Okay.
That's correct.
Do you mind just reading back that motion one more time? Sorry.
Okay, I'll read it here. That the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood receives the water and wastewater connection charges presentation for information. And further, that the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood approves the Village of Norwood water and wastewater connection fees as presented. And further, that the Township of Asphodel-Norwood directs staff to prepare the correlating bylaw with a phased-in approach for its consideration at the next regular meeting.
Okay. Mayor Wilford.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Burt.
Yes.
Councillor Hodge-Greaves.
Yes.
Councillor Walsh.
Yes.
Councillor War.
Yes.
Motion is carried.
All right. Moving along. Staff and committee reports. R8, consolidation, financial statement, and financial audit. Candace, CAO, Clerk Treasurer, joined by Jonah Park with Baker Tilley. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. So we have Joanna Park and we have Mr. John Hickey from Baker Tilly with us today to present the 2022 audited consolidated financial statements from municipal staff's perspective. The audit process went as smoothly as an audit process is going to go. Lots of things learned as always, which is appreciated by the Baker Tilly team. And from the staff's perspective, everything went exceptionally well and support the presentation that's going to come forward today. So I believe we can pass the floor over to Joanna or John, whichever one of you is going to take the lead.
Thank you very much, Candace. It is myself going to speak. John's playing the role of Anna today, and he'll also answer all the hard questions. So thanks very much for having me. In your package, I understand that you have the presentation as well as the financial statements and a letter from us to you. The presentation is a summary of the other two documents, but I'm happy to speak to the other two documents if you have questions about them specifically that I didn't address as part of the presentation. So we start the presentation with you can go to the next slide, John. Thank you. With the auditor's report. And we only duplicate on here the most important paragraph out of the auditor's report. And when you're looking at the full auditor's report, which is 2 pages long, this is the second paragraph. And it says, in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the township at December 31st, 2022. And they are in accordance with the Canadian Public Sector Accounting Standards. So those are the standards, accounting standards that you as a municipality have to follow. The other thing to note is the word consolidated. So these are the financial statements, not only of the township, but also consolidated in is the library and the cemetery board as well, because ultimately council has control over those boards. So the operations of those two organizations are also included in that. So this is a clean auditor's report and what you as council would expect to see. Then we're required by Canadian auditing standards to let council know what we do as part of our audit. So we review council minutes. We make sure that anything that should be in the financial statements and that's discussed by council is in fact in the financial statements. We do lots of testing. We do random sampling. We do analytical review. We look at management's estimates to make sure they're reasonable. And then we look at your different systems of the money coming in and the money coming out. We look at the controls that are in place. We test them, we get an understanding of the controls, and if we have any recommendations for those controls, we bring those to management at the end of the audit. The audit is complete, pending council's approval of the financial statements, which ideally will happen today. And then after that, we ask management to sign a representation letter, just stating that they have provided us everything we need to do the audit, and that is included in your packages there, so you know what we're asking them to sign, as well as we get legal confirmations from your lawyers to confirm that if there's any outstanding claims there, whether they should be put within the financial statements or whether a general disclosure is adequate. We had no significant difficulties encountered during the course of the audit. Really want to thank Candace and her team for all their help during the audit. It's been busy the last, definitely a couple of years even for all our municipal clients. So I understand that the audit is probably the last thing they really want to deal with. So we thank them for their cooperation. We had no changes in our initial audit plan as to what we audited and no disagreements. And we didn't have any uncorrected audit differences, which means basically any differences we had as we went through the audit, we talked to management about it. We made those adjusting entries so they are reflected within the financial statements. Then we get into the numbers. So what we've done, instead of just duplicating the financial statements, which is a lot of numbers, we take the different segments of the financial statement. So the first one is the financial assets. And we show a 5-year comparison just so you can see the trend over the years. So your largest financial asset is your cash and temporary investments of $3.9 million. It has gone down. You've used a significant amount of cash and reserves and development charges during the year, which of course were sitting as cash for the various capital projects that went on. There are some short-term investments, and those are within the cemetery board, $50,000. You have trade and other receivables of $2.3 million. And that's just increased over the last couple of years with the capital projects going on. So capital funding being outstanding at the end of the year from the province and the feds, as well as an increase in the amount of HST that's owing to you at the end of the year, your HST rebate, because of the capital purchases going on, as I said. So provincial funding, you have $500,000 receivable at the end of December, and that's ISIP funding as well as funding for the storm that occurred in May of 2022. And then federal grants, you have ISIP and CCRF, about $770,000 outstanding at the end of December, and then HST about $315,000 to make up most of that $2.3 million. Taxes receivable has increased a little bit, but when you look at the amount of receivable you have compared to your total taxation or the amount billed during the year, in the prior year, you were at about 5.36% of that balance. And this year you're at 7.14%. So there is an increase there, and definitely management needs to watch that. But the provincial guideline is 10%. So you're still almost 3% lower than the provincial guideline. So still within the great, numbers, but you've definitely seen a little better in the past. So. And then assets held for resale, that includes inventory at the community center as well as cemetery inventory. So the plots as well as the columbarium niches. So that's increased with the new columbarium this year at the cemetery. And then the following slide just shows a graphical representation. You can see the green one being the cash, and that's just going to go up and down just depending on what's going on. And then the blue one being your trade and other receivables, and that's significant compared to prior years. And then your financial liabilities, this amount's owing at the end of the year or that you have on hand to use for future periods. Your accounts payable and accrued liabilities has gone down from the previous years, and that's just as a result. You had a lot of development charges on hand at the end of 2021 that were owed to the county, so those were paid during the year. The rest of that balance is just really invoices and trade payables that were owed for 2022 that just were paid in 2023, as well as accrued payroll and vacation and items such as that. Your deferred revenue, go back, John. Your deferred revenue obligatory reserve funds, that's your amounts you have on hand to spend in future periods for development charges, your CCBF, which was your gas tax, now known as the Canada Community Building Fund, and your parkland fees as well. So your development charges, you used about $940,000, it's down from $940,000 the year before at $326,000 at the end of December. And your gas tax funding, or CCBF, is at $57,000, down from $119,000. So that's why you see the drop there. You've been using those funds appropriately, and therefore you have $466,000 to use in the future periods. Your deferred revenue is just other funding. Most of that's your cannabis funding that sits there until you can find a purpose for it. And your long-term debt, no change there. It's just going down with your principal payments. And then your landfill closure and post-closure liability. This is the estimate to close the Norwood site, to actually do the closure of it, as well as then the required monitoring for the two sites until you kind of get the clean bill of health from the MOE. And then you can see there the changes over the 5-year period, the blue ones being the accounts payable and accrued liabilities. And you can see with the increase in projects going on in 2021 and 2022 that they're significantly larger than they have been in the past. And then the red one being the deferred revenue, and you can see the use of the funds from 2021 to 2022. The following slide just shows the non-financial assets, and the only one you have is your tangible capital assets. So that's the assets that you have that you're holding on to and using to provide your services to the ratepayers, $36.4 million. So this is the historical cost of those assets, less the amortization or the expensing of the assets over their useful life. It's gone up because your purchases were higher than your amortization. During the year, you had about almost $4 million in purchases of capital assets, and then only amortization of $1.6 million. So you see the increase there, and we'll see the breakdown of the additions further on in the slides. And this is just a snapshot of what your consolidated statement of operations looks like. So your total revenue was $9 million. When you look at the middle column, the 2022 actual, total expenses were $7.1 million to give a PSAB annual surplus of almost $1.9 million. So that's really just an increase in your accumulated surplus to give you the ending accumulated surplus of 38.6 million. Keep in mind, these numbers are on the PSEP basis, so the expenses include amortization, but they don't include capital additions. So that's why when you look at the budget column, you know, I know you didn't budget for $1 million surplus, and that's because you would have had capital coming out, and then reserve transfers would show as revenue and expenses, where under the accounting policies that we're required to show your financial statements as, they don't show as revenue and expenses. So it is hard sometimes for people to realize the difference between how you are budgeting, which is appropriate, to how the financial statements show. The following slide just shows again the trend of showing your total revenues and your total expenses and the annual surplus. And you can see in 2021 and 2022, with all the capital going on, the significant increase in your revenue, because you're recognizing all the revenue for those capital projects, but then you're not going to have the associated expense because it's going to be expensed over the useful life of those capital assets. So that's why you see the big differences there compared to in the prior years when you weren't doing as much capital additions. And then we look at your total revenue. So you had budgeted just under $8 million and you came in at just over $9 million. Property taxation being your largest revenue source this year. And even there was an increase in your budget, or increase from your budget to actual. And that's because your net supplementary taxation was more than expected. So with all the new builds, you'll have the supplemental taxation, and that is just increased revenue that you didn't know about, obviously, at the time of budgeting. Your user charges were up over budget, and that's there was an increase in tipping fees as well as building permits compared to budget. Now, your building permits were not as high as they were in 2021, which was about $255,000 higher in 2021 compared to 2022. But when you're looking at, and that was expected when you're looking at your budget, that was the big variances there. Your government of Canada, your federal funding there, you had money, $465,000 from ISIP for your community center renovations that you're working on, and then $212,000 for the skate park. Your provincial revenue of $1.4 million, $682,000 of that is your Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. And then you had $387,000 from the province for the community center. And then you got money for OSIP for roads as well of $340,000. Your other revenues, you get money from the other municipalities for fire services. Your penalties and interest on taxes, $53,000. The big increase there too is your investment income, of course, with the increase in the rates, $131,000. And then you have other revenue, mostly that's reimbursed work for the sanitary work done, as well as sidewalks. So work done, and then the developer is providing funds there. And then the last two lines are the development contributions earned. So that's the amount you actually spent of development charges, not the amount you brought in, but the amount that was spent, $636,000. And then the Canada Community Building Fund, same thing. That's the amount that was spent during the year, $195,000, to give you your total revenue of $9 million. And then we show a pie chart of where your revenues are coming from, 42.2% from taxation, 19.3% from your ratepayers through user charges, and 16.5% from the province, and 7.7% from the feds. And then your expenses, we have to show your expenses two ways according to the Public Sector Accounting Board standards. The first way is by more department, general government, protection, transportation. Those were all very comparable when you look at budget compared to actual, when you're looking at that those size of numbers. Differences, though, being in health services. I don't make up the categories, but the cemetery is included in health services. So that those expenses are not budgeted for. So that's part of the reason for your increase there, as well as there was an increase in your the supplement for the doctor. So that's also why you have the increase there year over year. And then planning and development, there was an increase there. There was an increase in legal costs. That was the most significant amount there. That gives you your total expenses of almost $7.2 million. And then we see the pie chart of the breakdown, and your largest, as expected, would be transportation at 30%, and then protection and environmental service at 18% each. And then the other way to show expenses is more by the type of expense, your salary and benefits, your interest charges, materials, contracted services. So you can see the breakdown there. Again, the same almost $7.2 million expenses, just showing a little differently. And you can see the pie chart there, 33% of your expenses are in salary and benefits and 31% in materials and contracted services, 12.3. And of course, amortization is just the expensing of the capital assets. So that's not a true cash expense, if you will. Sometimes councils to kind of recognize that. And then we talked about the $38.7 million accumulated surplus. This is showing the breakdown of what that is. 34 million of that 38 is already invested in capital assets. So that's the net book value of your capital assets, minus the debt that's associated with those assets and the unfunded capital. You have $650,000 of the Norwood water system that's getting funded each year through your budget process. So it keeps going down, but at this point you have 650,000 not funded at this point. And then we deduct the landfill closure liability because that doesn't need to be funded until you're actually paying those costs. And then the cemetery has an accumulated surplus of just over 100,000. And then as well, out of that, you have your reserves and reserve funds, just over $5 million. There's about $609,000 used during the year to actually do the almost $4 million in capital additions. So you see the decreases there to give you that 38 point to almost $7 million in accumulated surplus. And then the trend there you can see of the various types of reserves and reserve funds. The red one is your working and general reserve. So that was the one that was used a lot this year, as well as the gray one, which is your water and sewer reserve, as expected, would have been used a fair bit this year. But then you can see the other reserves still being added to. Then we talked about your $3.9 million in capital additions. This is kind of the breakdown of what you spent the money on. No surprise, 1.5 million for water and sewer, 1.6 in building, most of that's the community center. And then you had 539,000 for machinery and equipment. A lot of that was excavator, and then a little bit in vehicles, as well as roads, of course, and land and road improvements. And then it's good to look at your capital additions versus the amortization. So a big thing there is, are you replacing your assets at a greater amount than you're amortizing them or expensing them? Is the idea being that as you spend more money on capital, it's going to cost more each year than it did when you originally purchased it, which is what the amortization is based on. So it's not going to happen every year, but it's good to kind of look at a 5-year picture, which obviously you can see from here that you are replacing your assets at a greater rate than you're depreciating them on average. And then looking at the average useful life in the categories. And of course, this is just an average in each category. So it's not to say that, all your roads still have 46% remaining useful life. This is just the average of it. So you're going to have some that are brand new and some that are, are ready to be replaced. So but it's good to see the different categories. And the nice thing is here, your lowest one, or your one that's mostly amortized, is your vehicles, which would make sense because you replace those, more often than you would, say, or a building. And then the last slide I have here is just the net financial asset trend. So that's your financial assets minus your liabilities, and just seeing that trend there. With the use of cash this year, significantly, it went down a little bit, but still definitely in a very positive amount. And that is the end of our presentation. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Councilors, any questions? Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you very much, Joanna. Always a pleasure to see you every year, and such a concise report in both the presentation and the report that you sent. So I guess one of my questions, but you did address it, that even though we used a number of those reserves, we're still in a healthy position in balance with our expenses and our revenues, and things are still looking good. So that was one of my questions. So thank you very much. And then you were talking about And I missed part of it because my audio cut out on the liabilities. You'd mentioned some DC charges were owed, just invoices, trade payables, accrued payroll costs, that sort of thing. Do you have I looked in your, while you were speaking in the report, do you have that breakdown of amounts of those liabilities somewhere? And like I say, I looked quickly while you were speaking, but I couldn't pull it up.
They're not specifically in the financial statements. There
Okay.
isn't a breakdown, but I can tell you just by looking here, about 1.2 million of the 1.9 million is just normal trade payables.
Okay.
And then included in that, it would be accrued payroll, which would be about 126,000. And then the other big amounts in there are the developer deposits and the different agreement deposits. And that would make up most of the rest of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
So Deputy Mayor, we just received the check for the deposit for the pre-servicing agreement for Nora Park Phase 4 yesterday for 350,000 approximately. That would get added to that.
Okay.
So it includes all of those deposits and agreements. That's why that number is so high, because it's a liability to us it's not an asset to us, right? So we're, even though we're holding it essentially, but that a majority of that is actually agreement deposits with all the growth.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
No,
okay, we have another recommended motion. That the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood approves the 2022 consolidated financial statements of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood as presented. And further, that the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood authorizes the mayor and CAO clerk treasurer to sign the acknowledgement of council. Moved by Stephanie or Councillor Hodge-Greaves, seconded by Councillor Walsh. Any further discussion? All in favor of that motion? Motion's carried. Okay, Candace, would you like to please continue with the draft 2024 Norwood Water and Norwood Waste System budgets?
Sure. Just gonna share my screen.
And thanks again, Joanne.
Thank you. Have a nice meeting.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Come on, share your screen. We good? Can you see my screen? Yeah? Okay. I'm sorry, just let me see here. It's not actually looking.
It's a bit small.
Yeah, we're gonna just fix that here. Oh, that's fine. Full screen mode. How are we now?
It's a lot better.
Yeah, okay. So 2024 draft Norwood water rate budgets are going to be presented to council as per our schedule today, with final adoption of the bylaws scheduled for the council meeting on November 14th. So just to give an overview of the system, the Norwood water system consists of now 4 wells, a treatment facility, a disinfection system, a chemical feed system for corrosion control, because we added orthophosphate to the drinking water for corrosion, standby power, of course, through a generator, the standpipe that we know we're getting a new one, and then, of course, the distribution piping throughout the village in order to get the water into the user's hands. Usage, we have a design capacity of 1,965 cubic meters per day, average daily demand of approximately 700 cubic meters, as long as there's nothing else going on. That's the average use, such as a water main break or something of that nature. And currently there's approximately 1,100 meters installed. In every budget, I always like to touch on the unfunded capital that we have in the financing plan. So unfunded capital projects are projects that have been paid for, but the cost of them has not yet come out of the township's accumulated surplus, thus leaving them unfunded. The 2024 budget includes the approximately $50,000 in unfunded capital as per the financing plan that was endorsed a couple of councils ago in January of 2016. After the 2024 allocation is put forward, then it'll be approximately $550,000 that remains unfunded. This is the projects that were left unfunded. 2007, some water work was done on Ridge Street that has now been funded. King Street water work of approximately $193,000 has now been funded. The water meter upgrade project in 2012 for $166,000 has now been funded. But the two major projects that remain unfunded is the corrosion control implementation that was done in 2011 and water main replacement project on Highway 7 for $457,000 remains unfunded. So here's a snapshot of the revenue that's required in order to sustain the water system. So we have an increase in revenue required of approximately $182,000. You can see where the majority of that money is going. It's going straight into capital at $168,000, with only $13,000 of that increase funding operational costs. The net cost for the system is zero. You can see across the board, and all of this represents is that the system is self-funded and is not subsidized by the tax system. Of notable significant impact to the rates is majority capital driven, as you can see by the previous slide. Reserves, as we just chatted about with the financial statement presentation, that is, of course, basically the reserve fund has been depleted in order to support the Village of Norwood's portion of the standpipe. So any capital that is going to be completed in 2024 or until that reserve is able to be replenished is going to hit the rate. So that would include the Wellington Street reconstruction west of County Road 40 that council has been eager to get completed, as well as Margaret Street. So as we know, part of the servicing for Norwood Park Phase 3 was the upsizing of Margaret Street. The water main there needed to be upsized. Well, the developers don't have to pay to replace the services into existing homes, but since that street is going to be completely excavated, it only makes sense to take advantage of that and have the services replaced because they are aging as well. The fifth well to bring online as to continue to support growth in the municipality. That, of course, that was included in the connection fee study that you just stated. But again, in order to stay ahead of the growth, it would be funding the fifth well, and then the connection fees would pay that back. Citywide software, you're going to hear this in the municipal budget as well as a software change. To have Citywide is a software, you've probably heard me mention that name multiple times, for tangible capital asset subledger. So that's our asset management software. They have additional suites that could take on permitting from the building department, as well as road patrol for public works, maintenance manager that takes on all of the stuff that Kyle currently has for water wastewater department for all of his preventative maintenance obligations. So Citywide now has the ability to take that all on under one suite instead of having multiple different suites trying to talk to each other, which they never do, which just takes up more staff time to pull information from one to the other. And then the financial software will have all of this data feeding into it. So you're going to see that in the word Citywide software in explanations across multiple budgets for 2024. Ortho panel from wastewater department, and the finishing of the standpipe project. Once you kind of jumped a line there in the presentation. All of those obligations for 2024 boil down to, you know, an increase of approximately 8 cents in the variable rate and $3.07 in the monthly fixed rate. Which here's a snapshot of the actual impact of that. So you can take that, you know, the average family is going to use approximately 20 cubic meters. You know, that's going to boil down. This is what the 2023 cost would be at $41.89, the average monthly charge in 2024. So that's taking 20 cubic meters at the variable rate, as well as the average increase in monthly billing for the fixed cost. So whether you're a senior with a small cubic meter rate, you're going to see $3.47 up to a large commercial user, which is going to see approximately $11 per month. And that's it for the Norwood Water draft budget. And I will take any questions before we pop along on into wastewater.
We may have lost Mayor Wilford. Will I just go ahead with my question?
You will have to take chair to order to move.
I'll just wait and see. I'll give it a minute. Maybe we lost him.
We potentially have a motion to suspend, just so that we're compliant with everything. I think
I'll make a motion to suspend pending mayor's return.
Thank you. And second. Okay, Deputy Mayor, can you call the vote?
Oh, here he comes.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
Do you need a motion to unsuspend?
Well, we didn't call the vote, so we'll just say motion
Okay.
lost.
Okay.
Motion on the break was lost. Okay.
Sorry about that, councillors. IT problem again. Deputy Mayor Burt, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you very much. In your presentation, excuse me, Candace, I just wondered what the approximate cost remaining in the standpipe project will be moving forward into 2024 over the cost of construction that we've already put out for 2023. I just wondered where we were in that budget process for the standpipe.
So in the spreadsheet that was attached to the presentation, you'll see under capital expenditures, tower, and it's $276,490. So again, the bulk of, you know, Kyle's been kind of saying that during his update. So the bulk of that project is going to be completed this year. Obviously the standpipe will be up and running, but there is going to be a scope of work that isn't going to be able to be completed prior to December 31st. And I see Kyle online there. If he wants to jump on and actually give a detail as to what that scope of work entails, I'll allow him to do that. But it's my understanding it isn't going to be completely buttoned up.
Yeah, so potentially we could see Bean's work, their tie-in work. We may not see that invoice until the first of the year. We're hoping to see it by the end of the year, but it may be the first of the year. There will also be, again, some potential grading, site grading and remediation to be completed up there as part of that project. And other than that, we're hoping everything should be closed out this year.
Is there fencing too, Kyle?
And fencing, yes, sorry.
Fencing,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fencing won't be able to be completed till spring.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Ward. You're muted.
I should know better. Thank you, through you, Mayor. Once again, what is the ortho panel? What is that from the wastewater finishing?
Yeah,
I
so the
Field that one, Candace.
yeah, go ahead.
So we had purchased under this previous year's budget an ortho or a panel, a dosing panel for the wastewater treatment facility. There's 3 sets of these panels there, one for each SBR and one for the final effluent. The original plan a couple years ago was to buy a panel each year, have them installed so that over a 3-year, 4-year period, we would have all new dosing panels down there. Seeing what's come to light with the upgrades that are going to have to happen down there, and the fact that the ortho panel at the wastewater plant does need to be addressed, or sorry, the orthophosphate panel at the water plant needs to be addressed. Staff thought it was best if the wastewater plant sold the ortho panel, or transferred it, so to speak, to the water side, that's already down there because it hasn't been installed yet. And until we see exactly what's going to be required down there for these wastewater plant upgrades, just so that we're not throwing good money at bad if we have to change things or if the panel sizes need to be different or relocated. So that's the ortho panel that you're seeing there.
Thanks, Kyle. I did see that it was transferred over to the other side, so I just wanted clarification. I appreciate that.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, we have a recommended motion that the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood receives this report regarding the draft 2024 Norwood Water and 2024 Norwood Waste System budget for information.
Sorry to interrupt, Mayor
need to
Rolford.
do-
We still have wastewater budget to go through, don't we?
Yes, we do. We've only done water so far.
Sorry, yes.
That's okay. Give me a moment to switch screens here.
Right.
Okay. Everyone see okay? This is full screen. Okay.
Yeah.
So very similar pattern for this budget. You can see that the overview is 3 pumping stations, Belmont, Maple, and Alma. And the Alma Street one is located in Lions Park. And that's the one that we were just chatting about that requires extensive upgrades to take on future growth. Wastewater treatment plant, of course, sludge storage, a chemical system, and a collection system. And the collection system also requires upgrades because that's the force main. Usage, a design capacity of approximately 1,150 cubic meters, which differs from what council was told years ago where we were supposed to have 1,500 cubic meters. But again, the design capacity, the rated capacity for the wastewater treatment plant, what it says on paper is not what it can physically achieve, because they've included the ditch that's out in the front there that you've seen during the road tour with the weeds growing in it, the old ditch, that old concrete oxidation ditch. They actually included that in the design capacity, but it was never hooked up when it was constructed, the new plant. So the design capacity is overstated, where, realistically, because that is not in service, it's 1,150 cubic meters with an average of 650 cubes being used on a daily basis. Revenue required to support the 2024 wastewater operations and capital includes an increase in revenue of approximately $161,000, a decrease in operating expenses to help offset the increase in capital. So tightening that belt a little bit, for a net cost to the system of 0, of course, because there is no impact to the tax base as the users self-fund the system. Areas of significant impact. Engineering at the Alma Street sanitary pumping station, which we've chatted about, which of course will be offset by the connection fees. Same with the engineering for the force main, but again, has to be front-ended, and we'll claw that back in order to kind of stay ahead of the growth that's coming down the pipe. We can't wait to get the money to take on the project. New gear drive for screens, roof digesters, Maple Street Pump Station rehabilitation. That pump station needs some work. Citywide software that we just chatted about. And then of course the debenture payment for that was originally $2 million that was taken out in 2010. That debenture matures June 15th of 2045. It has a current balance of $1.17 million. Biannual payments are $28,500 approximately, plus interest payments. So that gets paid every June and December. They're biannual payments. That will continue until 2045 as it's an Infrastructure Ontario loan, so it is closed. The impact of that is you'll see no impact on the sanitary side to the variable rate, but a slight increase to the fixed rate on the wastewater side of $1.37. You can basically attribute the majority of the costs to the capital side of things in the capital works, and then of course inflation, which is impacting everything across the board, from fuel to the cost of filters. Even Kyle and I were just talking, the cost of chemical is, just skyrocketed, specifically if you compare it to 5 years ago. I mean, when you compare it year over year, it's still high, but when you actually take that and you compare it over and look back in 2017 or 18, it's really kind of scary, the impact of some of those costs. The impact on the system on the day-to-day user, you'll see it's $1.37 across the board because there's no change in the variable rate. So the variable rate stays the same, which means that the only impact is $1.37 to the fixed rate, and it's the same for everybody. So the impact on both systems. So for those, which is the vast majority, the 99% of the village is on both systems. And you can see that the overall impact on a monthly basis is ranging from $4.84 for a low volume user up to a $12.43 on a large commercial based user per month. Again, staff is recommending to move forward with the 75% fixed to 25% variable ratio in the 2024 budget. That has been in place since the water meters were installed in the village back in 2013. And then in 2014, this billing mechanism was up and rolling. And it's been that model. Obviously, if that model was to shift, the impact on the users would differ. So you'd see a high impact on the commercial users, and so it would be a negative impact, I guess you would say, but it would be a positive impact on the low volume users. And that's it in a nutshell. The other thing to mention is you don't see the Trent View Estates budget systems here. I did explain that in my staff report. We should have all the information we need, but there's nothing significant going on in Trent View Estates. So the budgets, should be able to be approved with the first look at them. There's not much to it, and Trent Hills isn't proposing anything that would cause any concern to this council.
Councillor War.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you for that presentation, Candace. As you said, inflation is hitting everything, and why would we not expect it to hit, some of the costs that we have as well in the township. I just want to clarify. So the billing is done bi-monthly. So when people get their bills, it's done bi-monthly, but you've broken it down into a monthly format for us to understand, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So
okay, I just want to
get bills 6 times a year, so they'll see double that because it's for 2 months.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yep. Good thought. Yep.
Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thanks very much for both presentations, Candace and Kyle. Certainly they've gone up a little bit more than they have in past years, I think, but certainly very, very reasonable in today's market and the way trends are going across the board. When you first started speaking, you talked about the unused oxidation ditch. at the treatment plant. And maybe this is for Kyle. Could that ever be used once expansion comes? Is it usable, or is it completely redundant to the system we have now?
We would have to have that kind of assessed based on the parameters that are now required of the new plant. So they did change when they built the new plant, and that system, I don't know if it's capable of putting out the effluent requirements that we need now. Even if it was, it's really only rated for, I believe, like 286 to 300 cubic meters a day, that system. So in saying that, it wouldn't buy a lot of leeway. And in order to even, like, everything there is mothballed, so the clarifiers would need to be rebuilt. The pumps, everything would need to be rebuilt. So I mean, we'd have to basically do a cost kind of analysis as to if for one, if it's even feasible, two, if it would meet the effluent requirements that we need to meet now.
Okay, thank you. And quite often, as in anything, quite often it's cheaper to go new versus try to refurbish old to meet, like you say, the changing requirements now. So thank you. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, good question.
Any further questions, councilors? Okay, we'll move on to the recommended motion then. That the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood receives this report regarding the draft 2024 Norwood Water and 2024 wastewater system budgets for information. Moved by Deputy Mayor Burt, second by Councillor War. Favor? That motion's carried. And our final staff report, our 10 management action list. Candace, please go ahead.
So you can see what we dealt with at November 8th. The only thing that's going to be bumped down into November 14th is the assumption of Norwood Park Phase 1. That will definitely be on November 14th. The solicitor and I got that buttoned up this morning. You can see that we have the municipal budget presentation for all of the for the public meeting for the municipal operating, municipal capital, and then we'll look at adopting. I'll probably quickly go through these slides again and then add Trentview Estates water at the public meeting, and then we'll have the water and wastewater bylaws at the next meeting as well. The tax rate bylaws will come next at the beginning of the year. So you'll have your interim tax rate bylaw that you're traditionally seeing like the end of January, which gets you through until May, but then the county will have to adopt their budgets and set their rates, et cetera. And then you see the final tax rate bylaw after that. The development charge bylaw public meeting. So public meeting for the development charges, very similar. Peter's going to come, but it'll have to be in person. So he's going to come in and do a presentation and be there for the public on the DCs. That's a mandatory requirement under the Act prior to the bylaw being considered at the December 12th meeting of council. There's a zoning bylaw amendment public meeting scheduled for 2:30. So the public meeting for, I think I put the time, yeah, I did. I put the times on the action list. So you'll see, we'll get right into budgets right at 1. Development charge, hopefully we can sew that up in an hour. I think we should. Traditionally, we should be able to do that depending on the questions. 2 o'clock development charge bylaw public meeting. And then Peter Simsico says that he should be fine to move forward with the public meeting for Hale at 2:30. So a lot of ins and outs, Mayor, as far as like motion to suspend and reconvene and that sort of thing, but we'll have that worked out for you on your Mayor agenda. Peterborough Fire Dispatch Agreement. Again, the agreement for with the city of Peterborough for dispatch is up for renewal. It is what it is. Yeah, it's going up along with the cost of everything else. But it has been built into the 2024 proposed budget. The policy based on the last conversation that was had at the council in regards to staff fire and volunteer appreciation, just based on that conversation and kind of just, well, the staff should do what they want, and then the fire, and then what should we do for committees and boards? I think probably that should be formulated in a policy. And then after further self-reflection, I'm going to bump that down to 2024 because I think the new CAO should actually reach out to the staff and the committee and council and actually draft that policy. I don't think it should be me. So going to be bumping that down. There's 2 consents coming forward. You guys have seen some chatter about this in regards to the Holborn Group and the Norwood Ag Society doing a land swap. So the Fair Board and Holborn Group, and that's what the consents are for them to do that land swap. The appointments for your acting clerk and acting treasurer appointments, that'll take effect as of the 27th of November. They'll be coming forward. Still hanging out hope for that municipal insurance renewal, you know, dangling hope there, but I have got the email about what the proposed rates are basically going to be, but if we don't see it, it'll definitely be available for you for adoption at December 12th. We have a tender out right now for a generator, and Peter says that he's going to be able to have that staff report ready. That was approved in the 2023 budget. The water wastewater rate bylaw, and then today council passed the motion for the connection fee rate bylaw. So that's, and then you'll see what's coming up in December. I've also added kind of the housekeeping staff reports that occur in the first quarter of the year, just so they don't kind of fall off the radar there for staff to be able to know, because there is compliance requirements for those housekeeping reports. Although they're housekeeping in nature, they are requirements under one act or another. So they need to be adopted, and the auditors do look for some of those. So it's important to ensure that they're adopted in a timely manner. So I just added those on there. Dates can be assigned as deemed fit as you move forward. And I don't think you're going to see all those zoning bylaw amendments on January 9th. I'm almost positive you won't. But as you move forward through the process, obviously you have to meet that 20-day notice period. And so whenever that's triggered, that'll trigger what council meeting it's going to come forward to. And there's not much sitting ready to go. As of right now, there's nothing sitting for a January 9th meeting, just based on the fact that all of these housekeeping reports, basically staff, when they come back from Christmas vacation, would have 2 days to prepare them for the very first time in order to get it out in an agenda. There's nothing that's that dire. So bumping them ahead to the second meeting in January to allow the staff at that time to digest that process on their own for the first time would make most sense. Unless one of these zoning bylaw amendments actually get out mid-December and you need to hold a meeting for to look at one of those zonings. Then you can see in 2024 council priorities ongoing. Some things have shifted around, and you can take a look at that and digest it. And if you have any questions for me, I'll answer as best as I can, but it is obviously fluent and we'll move around as needed as you guys work through the next few months. You're on mute, Mayor.
Any questions of Candace, councillors?
No, good.
No. Can I have a motion that the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood accepts this report with the revisions suggested by the CAO, Clerk Treasurer, and members of council? Moved by Councillor Walsh. Second by Councillor Hodge-Greaves. Any further discussion? All in favor? Motion's carried. Council liaison reports. Does anybody have any liaison reports for today? Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just one notice there. I was at a source water protection meeting last week, and I'd mentioned that about there was a well care webinar, and there's also another one coming up for a septic webinar, and I will get that information to Melanie. I thought I could do it while I was sitting here, and I can't find it, but I know I have it somewhere, so I will get it to you with that link. And I think it's rather timely for our municipality in our county, as you know, within a year we will be changing from Peterborough Public Health and bringing that in-house. So I will find that and get that to Melanie, and she can send it out with the minutes. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor War.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I just wanted to give an update on the Cultural and Heritage event that's coming up on the 18th, 25th, and 26th. The committee's been very busy. We've been working, I don't know, quite a few days out at the Heritage Center preparing, and we've also been working with other groups such as the library, the Norwood Horticultural Society, and we also are reaching out to Mapleview and Pleasant Meadows, and all have different dates that we're going to help with things with the old-fashioned Christmas. So we are really thankful for the support of the community, and we hope to see everybody out at one of those days, either the 18th, 25th, or 26th. So I just wanted to update people on that. Thank you.
Anyone else? 25th is the Santa Claus Parade also, if councillors haven't heard that. Councillor Hodge-Greaves.
Thank you, Mayor. Halloween was last week, and I was in Westwood with my kids, and a real highlight is always the fire trucks coming through and flashing their lights, and I enjoy that tradition from the township, and the kids do, and it sort of starts the official time that you can start walking down the road. So that's a real nice thing in Westwood, and my children really enjoyed it, and it's nice that the fire department still does that. So it was a fun, snowy night out, but it
Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up regarding Pumpkin Parade that happened on November 1st, day after a nicer evening after Halloween on October 31st. We had a great turnout. I think we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 160 to 170 pumpkins that were collected and dropped off. I had an awesome row of pumpkins on both sides of the walkway up there. And the really good news at the end of the night is we gathered them all up and we took them to Serenity Lane Farm in the township, where they will get fed to animals. So a nice recycle at the end of it as well.
There was supposed to be a trails meeting that night, but a couple of the members had to work at the pumpkin parade. So unfortunately, we didn't have a quorum, so there was no trails meeting. With no other reports, I did go past correspondence, which I haven't got any. Have you? Does anybody, Candace, know? No correspondence? CAO Clerk Treasurer list. Candace, please proceed with your list.
Thank you. So the main thing that I had on my list was to chat about what the Deputy Mayor brought up under business arising from the minutes. And outside of that, I have nothing further to report to council at this time. Thank you.
Very good. General business. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to discuss? Councillor Walsh.
Yeah, I'm saying it really is in follow-up. Back at the meeting on October the 24th, we had received a donation request from the Beehive Outdoor Rink in the amount of $500. We did defer it at that meeting because we did want to gather some additional information that did come in through Seamus's report today that I think in my mind, yes, our staff did do some work down there last year getting the rink up and going. They got an army of volunteers there. It sounds like, again, I think there's some great learnings from it last year that we'll probably have less staff time involved this year. So I know they put in a request for $500 to really help them with the cost of insurance. And I firmly believe this outdoor rink, hopefully if the weather cooperates, will be bigger than better than it was last year. And I would put a motion on the floor that we do approve the $500 donation request to the Beehive Outdoor Rink to support them with insurance costs.
You second that motion, Deputy Mayor Burt?
Yes, I will.
Any discussion, councillors? All in favor? The motion's carried.
Thank you.
Any other general business? Deputy Mayor Burt.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention that the Electra site with the battery storage, there is a list of communities locally if you go on their website. So if anybody wanted to check that out, you could see them. I think there's one in Marmor and Madoc as well, a couple in Peterborough. Anyway, there is a list, and that's just the one company. I'm sure there's others within the province doing the same thing. And actually, we have a PCFA meeting. It was supposed to be tonight. It's postponed till next week. And they are bringing a policy paper about having these on agricultural land. So maybe next week I guess I may be able to bring some more information following that from regards to the agriculture community and these battery storage plants. So I will do that. And just a reminder, I'm sure you're all aware, but also for the public, our throngs of people who listen to these meetings, Remembrance Day ceremonies in Westwood at 8:45 and Norwood at 10:45 at the respective cenotaphs. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, moving on. There's no closed session today. We have no notice of motions. So we'll move on to the confirming bylaw. Candace, please.
Being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of the Council of the Township of Asphodel-Norwood held November 8th, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time and numbered bylaw 2023-53.
Moved by Councillor Ward. Moved by Councillor Hodge-Greaves. All in favor? Motion's carried. And your future meeting schedule's on there. Everybody's had a chance to go over it. And can I have a motion of adjournment, please? Moved by Deputy Mayor Burt. Second by Councillor Walsh. All in favor? That motion's carried. Thanks, councillors, and Melanie and Candace for the IT support.
No problem. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.